And we are live yet or not? I don't
We
see.
we have been live for the last 2
Ah,
minutes.
okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, good. I then welcome everybody to the final and ultimate more online event. The project comes to an end on Monday, and in today's session we'll have a final discussion about how the TEN-T will change our cities, or our cities will change the Trans-European network. When I was preparing the event, I was thinking of this image from my youth. I don't know if you are acquainted with this image. It's a famous 1960s popular science image where in dimensions of powers of 10, people look at space moving from very small to very large. We're somewhere in the middle. We've looked in more at the curbside, at the 1 meter square dimension. And in this webinar, this final webinar, we will zoom out to the level of the urban node in the Trans-European network, to the level of the corridor of the Trans-European network, and the Trans-European network as such, like you see it here in its old version before the revisions that are currently being discussed would enter into force. We have a great panel today. We'll start with 2 presentations that give a modal perspective on Trans-European networks and the role of urban nodes in the network. And then we'll move into a presentation on governance and also on corridor management and research and innovation surrounding the Trans-European networks. I'll introduce the speakers later, but I have prepared a couple of slides on what we can expect from the new TEN-T, or the new approach to the TEN-T, because there's a lot happening, a lot is planned. If it all goes through as the Commission has suggested in its revised TEN-T regulation. One of the important changes, the changes we will discuss today, is a complete overhaul of the approach of urban nodes in the network. And that overhaul kicks off with a statement in a very important document for our sector, the Urban Mobility Framework, that states very early on in the document as a key statement that cities are key components of the Trans-European network as main connection points. They are the backbone of the single European transport area and essential for a well-functioning of the single market. It's nice to hear nice things being said about cities in that context. The new approach comes with a new definition, with new requirements, new priorities, and an improved governance. Yeah, the definition, I'm not going to read it aloud, but there is a new concept for what an urban node means. It's an urban area where infrastructures of the long distance meet with local mobility infrastructures. There is also a new definition in view of scope of what are urban nodes, and the Commission has proposed a very simple definition, simple in its pure sense of the word, that authorities or cities, entities on the TEN-T that are above 100,000 inhabitants can be qualified as urban nodes, and that leads to a number of above 400 urban nodes, where at this moment we were looking at 88 nodes on the core network. There are a couple of requirements put to the urban nodes as well. I'm not going to read the full article, but in the new approach, the nodes become hotspots for alternative fueling infrastructure. there is a timeline of requirements starting in 2025, when the nodes would have to adopt a sustainable urban mobility plan and also monitor performance of mobility in their networks through a set of urban mobility indicators. 5 years later, by 2030, the idea is that cities have, or the urban nodes have worked on seamless and safe interconnection between modes, for instance, through access of multimodal information. Same for freight transport, where the idea is also to build infrastructure by 2040. So multimodal freight terminal for each node, where the long distance can interface with the last mile. Same for multimodal passenger hubs, where the timeline is a bit steeper. By 2030, a functional multimodal passenger hub should be in place. So high ambitions, a lot of work on the table for urban nodes. Yeah, these requirements are also connected to additional priorities, greening of fleets, a better modal share for public transport and active modes. And what is interesting in these priorities, keep an eye on that article and what is happening there, because it's also somehow could point in the direction of financing, EU financing in the future. Final word on the change in the approach for the urban nodes is the fact that there is attention on the governance of urban nodes in the network, where the transport corridor coordinator is asked to establish, or could establish, an urban nodes working group, and that in the action plan, the implementation planning of the corridors, specific measures in the urban nodes need to be put in place. So a complete refocus of attention in the TEN-T to the urban nodes. But that, of course, comes also with these great powers come great responsibilities, to put it in these terms. A lot of work for cities and regions to live up to that new approach. And it's that we will discuss today in this webinar, a webinar that is recorded. So please do make sure you are aware of that. And a webinar where we will interact with you through the chat and through the Q&A. So it's an overseeable group at the moment, about 30 people. So we'll start from your comments in writing, and if there is sufficient time, we might give you the floor also to say a couple of words. I think Daniel can manage to give you the speaking rights as well. We'll see how it works in view of time. So let's start. I understand I didn't say yet who I am. I'm Ivo Kree. I'm working for POLIS. I'm so enthusiastic about the theme that I jumped right into it. I'm director for policy and project at POLIS, network of about 100 cities and regions, many affected by or interested in TEN-T and urban nodes development. And I've followed the theme for about 15 years now, active in advocacy around this topic. So I will try to be a neutral moderator, but I might sometimes get off the rails in an opinionating role as well. I'll try to limit that. So the first session is about to start, shaping the TEN-T together. We have always believed in a co-creational process surrounding TEN-T. TEN-T is not only a top-down process, but also a bottom-up process. And in the next session, we'll hear from 4 important stakeholders of how they co-create the Trans-European network. We'll start with Aleksander Buczyński from ECF, who will present in in his presentation the role of cycling in trans-European networks. After that, we'll hear from the public transport sector. But we'll start with Aleksander. I'll stop sharing my screen. I would invite the other speakers also to stop sharing, except for Aleksander. And then the floor is yours, Aleksander.
Thank you, Ivo. Good morning, everyone. I would like to talk, as Ivo mentioned, about the connections between the trans-European network and cycling. But maybe first a few words about the trans-European network in general. I'm sure most of you are aware, but just to quickly run through, it is basically the EU flagship transport policy. It's a network of roads, rails, inland waterways, motorways of the sea, ports, airports that connect the whole continent. It does not include, as for now, cycling or walking routes. And you might have this image that this serves people who travel, for example, from Lisbon to Helsinki. But in fact, if you look closer at what's happened on the network, most of the trips done on TEN-T, most of the traffic is local. If you look at the traffic jam in the top right corner on recently upgraded widened section of a TEN-T road, 95% of those cars are not going to cross the border, and 80% of them just come from less than 30 kilometers away. So this explains a bit why, one of the reasons why urban nodes are so important for functioning of the network. And another thing that is not so commonly realized is that TEN-T is also about tourism. A lot of those long distance trips are not really essential trips as we understood it during the pandemic times, but the people also traveling for holidays, for their free time. So it serves different purposes. It's not only for long distance essential trips. On the other hand, we have cycling. Cycling around 250 million people cycle in Europe. On average, they do 150 billion kilometers on bicycle per year. This translates to CO2 savings of around 16 million tons. And since I mentioned tourism, tourism is also an important aspect of cycling. There are more than 2 billion cycling touristic trips, which generate more than 40 billion euro income, which is a significant share of the general total benefits of cycling, translating to around 150 billion per year. Now, the current TEN-T regulation, so before the revision, before the changes proposed by the Commission, has a recital about cycling. And this is a nice encouragement to exploit synergies with other policies. And cycling is given as an example of how you could exploit this kind of synergies, for example, by including on civil engineering structures, bridges, tunnels, cycling infrastructure. This regulation was adopted in 2013. Now, 9 years later, we see that still this kind of synergies are not being exploited. This is a very recently opened bridge on the Croatian border. It's a bridge only for cars. If you, it has 6 lanes for cars and no possibility to get by foot or by bicycle. So if you want to visit your neighbors on the other side of the border, you can either drive 5 kilometers, or if you would like to walk or cycle, you need to make 40, 50 kilometers detour, also on not so safe roads. Moreover, we see that the TEN-T infrastructure, the motorways, the high-speed railroads, very often becomes a barrier for cycling. The the lines, the linear infrastructure cuts towns, cities, rural areas without providing sufficient density of crossings through them. So you again to go to visit your neighbors on the other side of the upgraded railroad. You either drive or you need to take 5-10 kilometers detour because there is not enough crossings for active non-motorized modes of transport. On the other hand, we also see good practices when the synergy was exploited and when good quality cycling infrastructure was integrated in design of the TEN-T projects, road project, rail projects, but also inland waterway projects. And this is something we really wanted and still would like to see more as a part of the policy, not something we or our member organizations, national or regional member organizations, have to fight for on each individual case, but something that is integral part of the policy, that when you developed a project for a new long distance connection, you'd also take into account all those places that it crosses in between and look for opportunities to improve conditions for cycling. So this is what we came with to the start of this revision process, which is now currently ongoing. We propose to include a cycling network alongside the other modes of transport, a separate section in the chapter on different modes of transport as a part of the Trans-European network, but also to have a procedure for systematically integrating the necessary elements of walking and cycling infrastructure when you implement projects on other TEN-T networks, road, rail, inland waterway, and so on. And this is how we started the process. I will tell a bit more what we managed to achieve and what still could be improved in the second session.
Okay, thank you, Aleksander. I'm also looking at the questions in the chat, if there's any comments for you. What I like very much in the approach is the that you also emphasize this do no harm rule, the fact that at least don't create barriers for cycling. I think that's a very important message. And then, of course, use the full potential of cycling and add new infrastructure, but that you also highlight this problem of involuntary or voluntary creation of barriers that are there. I don't see any comments from participants. The question that I wanted to raise is also this the cost and the cost benefit dimension. Maybe have you done any vision on that? Is that we are talking about expensive infrastructures? Is cycling adding cycling infrastructure expensive or
it's
not?
much less expensive to add it as a part of the big project when you reconstruct the whole railroad line, for example, than to add it as an afterthought when it's implemented by a different authority, for example. And this is one of the problems we see with the TEN-T now. We have, for example, the National Railroad Infrastructure Company implementing a rail project, and for them, cycling is not a part of their core business. They're not interested to do anything for cyclists. But then they build their investments. They build, for example, new bridges, or they replace level crossings with bridges alongside the railroad. And then a few years later, municipality comes to implement their cycle network. And they have to sometimes demolish the new bridges to rebuild parts of them. And not many municipalities can afford this kind of investments, while it would be 0.03% of costs if done at this stage of of designing the project if cycling was taken into account at the very beginning of the planning stage.
So think in an integrated way, and I think also the question of build capacity about cycling in the organizations that are developing TEN-T infrastructures, because they need to be aware and capable of integrating cycling.
Well, it's easy to put all the blame on the big state-owned infrastructure companies, but also on the other hand, there is a need of local or regional stakeholders of knowing what they need in terms of cycling infrastructure. So having plans for the cycling networks, and to be able to tell, yes, we need the bridge here at the time the investment is done, and not 5 years later.
Yeah, good points. Okay, thank you, Aleksander. We'll hear from you later also. And we turn now to Emmanuel Dommergues from UITP. Also, he will talk about the position that public transport can have in cities, and also in the relation between long distance and last or first mile. So the floor is yours.
Thank you,
Emmanuel.
Thank you, Ivo. Can you hear me, see me? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, to all questions.
Okay, thanks. First, I'm really delighted to be part of this great session with high-level speakers, and thank you for the moderation, Ivo. I'm delighted to talk about a major topic for Europeans, the future of TEN-T, and I hope we can provide value also outside the EU. So, as it's been mentioned, and thank you for the great introduction, and the two of you for mentioning elements regarding TEN-T, so we'll not add anything more because a lot has been said. I think it's time for all of us, if I may say, to raise our voice. Right. Just a few words to introduce UITP. We're a global network of public transport and sustainable mobility stakeholders, and we've been involved in this EU-funded project, particularly to bring our views and expertise on the public transport dimension of public space design. Let's move on to our topic today. So before before delving into the presentation, I'd like to just share a general word as an introduction about our approach. We'll look at our vision, or the UITP vision of what the city could be, and then from that vision we will look at the role that public transport can be, public transport and sustainable modes should be playing, and also the role that they should be given. And then later on we'll share on how does this translate practically for TEN-Ts. So let me just start with this slide, and let's step back in 2020 when hard lockdowns were implemented across the world. It's not necessarily the best experience we ever have experienced, but we had those strong restrictions, and we also were confronted with harsh health context, the least one can say. Still, what we experienced was a different urban and suburban environment, an environment that to a certain extent was transformed, with less car traffic, more space for walking, cycling, public transport, and also for place-related activities. We have enjoyed free public space, and also rediscovered the perspectives, the landscape of our cities, of our environment. We had air pollution, and we have been enjoying blue skies. There was less noise, and we have been able to listen to birds singing. So why stressing this? Because this different environment has been put in front of our eyes. It has appeared as something which was possible. It was just an incantation from, let's say, a nicely presented transport strategy document. Next. Of course, we are all enjoying, I think, a slow recovery to normal life. And here, for instance, in Belgium, we can enjoy maybe more activities, more collective, more social activities with less stringent restrictions at different pace in different countries. But the existential experience that we lived through COVID could be linked to our transport strategies, and I think it's important to have a vision to talk about these transport strategies. We could in particular mention the fact that we have experienced a different way of accessing people, accessing friends, jobs, and different activities. And this overarching goal, access, I stressed it 3 times as presented in the title, is of course a fundamental element of our transport and mobility strategies. But transport authorities and generally speaking, transport stakeholders cannot also neglect other high-level challenges that can be identified following the definition of sustainable development, or according to more recent concept SDGs. We're talking, among other things, about climate change mitigation, reduction of pollution, equity, social justice, and a dynamic city, and generally speaking, a dynamic environment. So, I mean, COVID has basically put us in front of us a different environment and really questioned to a certain extent this topic of access, and really put forward the fact that mobility, though providing, of course, benefits, could also provide some quite strong negative impacts. Linking the 2 previous slides, now we can outline our vision at UITP regarding, let's say, city and the role of public transport. And also, we're not just talking about public transport, or what Aleksander just presented regarding bikes and pedestrian is also, of course, fully part of this multimodal approach. But mobility requires, of course, some form of transport. Transport needs to be sustainable for our cities and our lives also to be sustainable. So this is our vision, and this implies 3 things. First, public transport should be the backbone of our mobility systems, and transport stakeholders have actually, particularly in the past months, years, been striving on regaining public trust, adapting to new lifestyles and rhythms, adapting the supply, looking at new geography to be served by public transport, and also providing integrated and door-to-door solutions. The second element to meet this vision of sustainable transport, sustainable mobility, sustainable lifestyle is integration, combination, and intermodality. These 3 elements should be key if we want to reach sustainable mobility. We should shift away from, let's say, a car-only type of mobility and car-only type of lifestyle. And this requires the development of bundle of services, door-to-door services, and also look at real but also virtual services, virtual mobility, because as we've seen during COVID, maybe we can also benefit from that kind of mobility. And then, of course, we mentioned the topic of decarbonization. Of course, decarbonization is a major topic, but maybe the attention, and that's one key message we'd like to share from UITP, is that we should not just focus on e-cars, because to make it a bit caricatural, but I think it's quite a strong, powerful image. Congestion of electric car will still remain congestion, right? And we know that one key inefficient aspect of cars is the fact that they consume a lot of space, and it requires some infrastructure, as mentioned previously, that sometimes create also some breaks for other modes. So let's focus on decarbonization, but let's probably refocus on the right modes, and also let's consider that decarbonization, electrification, of course, is key, but also raises a couple of challenges. All of them are not under control so far. Everyone's working in the right direction, but that's something that we also need to take into consideration. So that's our vision. So from that vision, UITP has actually developed a series of work, and I just would like to focus on 2 aspects, which is demand management and mobility hubs. And those are, of course, directly in line with TNTs. Demand management refers to, let's say, infrastructure design and management, and mobility hubs could also be directly linked to the hubs that were mentioned previously by Ivo in the presentation of the TNT. If we look at demand management, basically, UITP members have looked at, again, transport and mobility strategy, and have questioned the traditional approach that transport people, policymakers tend to adopt, the habit of developing even more supply. On the contrary, the idea would probably be to focus more, again, on accessibility. And how do we improve accessibility? Not necessarily by developing new infrastructures, but probably by better managing them, of course, ensuring that they provide the right possibility for all modes to be able to move around, but more importantly, maybe to consider demand, not just to consider the infrastructure, not always to consider that all the answers will come from more infrastructure or better infrastructure. The answer should also come from the way we manage demand, we influence demand, and we change travel habits. What kind of benefits can we derive from these kinds of approach? As we say in UITP, happy people using sustainable modes, but also happy infrastructure managers and transport authorities who will be able maybe to relax to a certain extent their policies regarding infrastructure. The second aspect that we have looked at is more practical, is what we call mobility hubs. A mobility hub is not just an efficient interchange between different transport modes, it's a place of life. It's a place for people, by people, where actually we can travel without necessarily requiring to move around. And again, we come back to this question of access and accessibility. Right. From that vision, what kind of lessons can we learn? And I will finish with these two slides. I think first and foremost, I think what I'm going to present, of course, is in line with what has been studied and recommended by the MORE project. And if we look at TNTs, I think it's interesting to bring our attention on those two functions that have been identified in this project, MORE project, the movement and the place. If we look at the movement functions of a street, of a network, etc., we consider to UITP that the network should be conceived in a way to provide full priority, of course, to sustainable modes, sustainable mobility, so public transport and shared modes, etc., etc. At the core of this, of course, lies pedestrian. That's a very important element. And by doing so, by promoting public transport, multimodality in the design, but also in the way we manage the street, we will free up some space. And we will be able to free up some space that can be used for other functions. And TNTs will also probably be able to play the role that other networks or other elements of the city could play in the mitigation of heat, for instance, in the management of water when there are floods, etc., etc. So this is a key element. This is how we envision this transformation of TNTs. But we know that there are a couple of challenges. I'm not going to talk about the governance challenge because this is going to be discussed later, after this presentation. I will not dive into more practical aspect as it's been presented by Aleksander, but maybe just stressing the fact that when we consider those TNTs, we consider some infrastructures which tend to accumulate, if I may say, some functions. And when I say some functions, I mean a large variety of different types of functions, not always compatible between each other. And that's probably a key challenge when looking at TNTs. How do we design, how do we manage them, how do we organize them in a way to deal with different types of goals? And it's probably something political, very, very, very important, something in which politics has to play. And also, as you mentioned, Ivo, it's not just top-down, it's also a bottom-up approach. Consultation has definitely a role to play. So to summarize, you have to
conclude. Yeah.
To summarize from UITP, just let's say keywords are access, public transport priority, multimodality, with this challenge of let's say fine-tuning the different objectives or different roles, functions to be held by TNTs. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. There's a question about tourism, but I think we'll take that for the second round. So I'll keep that in mind because it's a topic we didn't really look at in more, but I give the speakers some time to think about that in the panel discussion. I don't see any other questions, and we're running quite late, so I will my questions also for the panel, but thank you, Emmanuel. Then we move to the to one of the principal stakeholders in the TEN-T, the urban nodes themselves, and we have Sebastian Schöneck from the Frankfurt region here, who has a very extensive experience in TEN-T advocacy, but also in locally or regionally getting the urban node around Frankfurt and in this region organized. And that's why we invited Sebastian to talk about governance of urban nodes as an important principle to realize the objectives that have been mentioned by the previous speakers. Sebastian, the floor is yours, and I will share your slides from my my computer, and you tell me when to then move on.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. So thank you for having me today. And as Ivo outlined, yeah, we have quite a history of collaboration with the POLIS on the matters of urban nodes. So I'm really, really delighted for digging a bit deeper into the governance questions today. Yeah, my name is Sebastian Schöneck. I'm working for the European Office of the Metropolitan Region Frankfurt-Rhine-Main. So I have the very nice pleasure to represent one of the EU's heart of production, finance, and trade in Brussels. And so you can imagine that the question of transport and mobility is really crucial for us, especially as we're geographically located in the middle of everything. So this connection that Emmanuel already hinted at in his presentation between local and long distance transport, that's very relevant for us. So maybe, yep, let's just dig into the topic. Maybe one sentence first to the Frankfurt-Rhine-Main region. So we have a regional authority in the core of the region, consisting of 18 municipalities with over 2.4 million inhabitants. But we also represent the greater metropolitan region, which also is made up of awesome cities like Mainz, Wiesbaden, and Darmstadt, and containing more than 5 million people altogether. So you can really see that the question of governance is relevant to us. And I think we all agree that an urban node is not just a name on a list, but a functional area where the different modes are connected, but also where the connection between the TEN-T long distance infrastructure and the regional and local transport system physically takes place. And of course, due to interdependencies and shared infrastructure use, what happens in the one realm always more or less affects what is possibly happening in the other. And most certainly, this is not in the full control of one single city administration. So if you look at the map on the right, you see Frankfurt as the current urban node. It's a city with 700,000 inhabitants, but very closely connected to peri-urban and a very polycentric region around. So Frankfurt is Germany's commuter capital, or one of Germany's commuter capitals, with nearly 390,000 people inbound last year. And as you can see on the map on the left, that's the new TEN-T map. We will get 5 additional urban nodes in the region. So complexities will definitely get more intense. What I put in the middle just should highlight that the transport-related competencies and responsibilities are fragmented not only between the different layers of government, so federal, the Länder level with Hessen, the region, and the local level, but also, of course, between the different sectors. And then this is something very specific for our governance. We have a very strong regional public transport provider, the Rhine-Main Verkehrsverbund, which is great. But this is also, again, a separate regional body besides the regional authority. So we can go a step further. Long story short, there is a need for coordination, and our approach to deal with that is to do a multimodal regional Sump. So we try to kind of take the Sump principles and apply them to the wider functional transport area in our region. So in 2020, the regional authority adapted its very first regional Sump, and we have a shared agreed goal of getting a modal shift to 65% of sustainable modes in 2030. And there are 3 principles that were kind of agreed to achieve that. The first is avoid unnecessary traffic. I think that mirrors also what Emmanuel said. Then plan unnecessary traffic. That mirrors maybe what Alex was talking about. And of course, mirroring what both of them said, secure mobility for all. So maybe just let me stress that our Sump is kind of building on existing sectoral mobility plans, but also on local mobility plans. So it's not a kind of a substitution, but a kind of umbrella system. But in the process of the 2.5 years before the region agreed on the plan, the regional authority was also, of course, intensely consulting with citizens and stakeholders, but also developed a new mobility department. Sorry, which will have the task to ensure, of course, the measures in its own authority, but also to organize the cooperation with measures that are in the responsibility of other stakeholders. And so the idea is really to get a better linkage of land use planning, mobility planning, and a broader regional development, and also consciously widening the scope of action on the peri-urban area, and therefore targeting existing problems like noise or air pollution at the roots, while preventing urban and peri-urban rural mobility trade-offs. So let's go a step further. I just want to highlight a few of our core measures that are agreed in this regional Sump. And I think there you have 3 very strong dimensions. The first one is, of course, the active mobility dimension. So we're working on a regional network of bike infrastructure, coordinating the different measures of the municipalities. I think that's quite nicely fits to the messages by the ECF. But the region is also trying to plan and construct high-speed bicycle lanes by itself. And this is also very important, we do not want to forget about the pedestrians. So we installed a pedestrian forum and also started with a 5-minute walk analysis of walking distances between every place in the region and public transport offers to get a better understanding where we need to improve walkability. Second dimension, we call it a renaissance of rail. It's a bit lyrical, but very important for us. So we start from our quite rail-centered or public transport-centered land use planning, and then install the rail coach that helps municipalities and counties to reactivate already given up rail connections. But also, of course, we're aiming for new rail infrastructures, and one of our core projects is a new rail ring around Frankfurt, but I will have some sentence on that in a few minutes. And then the third dimension is, of course, this multimodal mobility hubs. This is something we also want to install in our region, but the idea to have a kind of Baukasten system. So the region is developing a kind of a blueprint, and then the municipalities and different actors can implement that on the fitting spots throughout the regions. Okay, let's go on, because I have a kind of last additional best practice example, and it's our FrankfurtRheinMein Plus project bundle. So the idea is that, as you saw before, we have this very different levels of authority and competencies, especially when it comes to infrastructure and rail. And the idea of FrankfurtRheinMein Plus is to bring in together all of these actors and then do a coordinated infrastructure update for the Frankfurt rail node. So the city of Frankfurt, Regional Public Transport Corporation, Rhein-Main-Verkehrsverbund, the state of Hessen, and the Federal Ministry of Transport, as well as Deutsche Bahn, has a say in this cooperation round. And so we try to bring together and fine-tune projects from additional local S-Bahn connections up to the very big federal flagship projects and this is something we're discussing very seriously at the moment, having a new underground rail tunnel under Frankfurt with a new main station below the current main station. So kind of raising transport capacities for rail in the Frankfurt node of around roughly 20%. So that would be a really, really big step. And also the EU is co-funding the planning at the moment. So you can see that kind of how this project bundle works. But, and this is the last thing I wanted to highlight with the pictures you see, we're already at the moment starting with this rail ring project with the western part, which is called the Regionaltangente West. It's a new bypassing rail connection, because as you can see with the commuter flows and the current very star-like public transport system, often people have to do unnecessary travels via the main station in Frankfurt. And so the idea is to ease the traffic pressure in the core via a new bypass connection. And this is also relevant for the overall TNT, because we have shared infrastructure in the Frankfurt core. So kind of delays in the regional transport system might affect the overall TNT rail system. So that's why the EU is also co-funding the planning of this regional bypassing connection. We're at the moment starting with implementing it, and it will have 26 stops on a 50-kilometer route when it's finished. And the nice thing is then you can really drive directly from, let's say, Bad Homburg in the north of Frankfurt, which is a city with 50,000 inhabitants, to the airport in the south of Frankfurt without having to cross the city center. Yeah, maybe so far to the best practice examples. I have a kind of final slide to bring all this together with lessons for TNT, but I think we spared it for the second
Yes,
part.
we'll talk about that later. Thank you, Sebastian. I also think you have a great story, also trying to work with the structures you have, but also bringing new elements like the regional SUMP. Very good story. Thank you for that. I'm looking at the question rounds, but that's for a question for Emmanuel. We'll take into the panel. So let's leave it for now and move to the final panelist. Thank you, Sebastian. With Tiina Ruohonen, working for the city of Oslo, coordinating a big operation, the Move 21 project. I'm always happy when a European research project like MORE can put its results in the hands of a trustworthy new recently started project, and that's the case for Move 21. I will have to stop share so that you can share, Tiina. I think we'll hear from Tiina how they try to bring all these elements we've heard now together, and also lift that into a cooperation and a knowledge sharing across urban nodes that are regionally connected, but also connected through a corridor cooperation. Tiina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So no pressure.
Oh, indeed.
It's nice to hear. We will do our best in Move 21 to bring some of the elements and bring more forward. In a way, I'm in a lucky position because Move 21 is recently started, so we can still talk about our plans and not so much about the results. And as you know, things always get complicated in these big innovation projects. Hold on, I'm going to try to share my screen with you, and I hope I will manage to do so.
Yes, we see it in edit mode for now. I hope.
Edit mode for now, okay. And if I put, and do you see it in presentation mode now?
No.
No. Right.
Can you try the trick we tried in the preparation?
Yes.
Otherwise, I will share it.
Here we go. Here we go. One more time. Okay.
Yes, it works. Good.
Lovely.
The floor is yours. Yep.
Thank you. All right, so thank you first of all for the invitation to come and speak at the final MORE conference. It's an honor. As I mentioned already before, I'm going to say a few words about Move 21, which is a relatively new innovation project funded by the Commission under Horizon 2020 Mobility for Growth call. And we started last year. So we're on our 9th or 10th month now. It's February, so 10th month. Yeah, so we're just getting started. So I'm essentially going to present some of our plans that I think actually fit very nicely with the previous presentations. And it would be really great to have some feedback also during the session and see if particularly one thing, if that resonates. So here we go. And as Ivo mentioned, I work for the city of Oslo already. I sit in the office of the governing mayor, and I'm the coordinator for this project. And I'm trying to move my presentation and nothing's happening. Hold on. My screen is frozen here. Ivo, do you have any suggestions?
I'll present from my screen and
what I can do, because I'm frozen here at the moment.
if you stop sharing, I can.
Okay,
I will do that. Just
hold on. I should be now.
I overwrite you to share.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. Hold on.
So.
And I think we should just move on. Yay! And it works. Wonderful.
Okay,
excellent.
good.
Thank you, Ivo. So anyway, Move 21 is a big innovation project, as mentioned. We've financed under the Mobility for Growth call topic in Horizon 2020. And we have 24 partners in 7 countries. And the project is quite broad, but what we have taken as a stance is that we are going to help cities to transform into multimodal urban nodes, covering both passenger and freight transport. And I think this is the very starting point for the project. So we're not looking at only at activities in the cities, but activities in their cities seen from the point of view of them being urban nodes. And I think we can just move on, very conscious of the time here. So we should just move on. Not going to go into any of details. These are the cities involved. Living Labs and the replicator cities are partners in the project, and they have large roles. And if you look closely, you might see that the Living Labs and the replicator cities are situated on one particular TNT corridor, but I'll get back to that in a minute. And I think we should just move on looking at the time. So here is some of the things that we have said to the Commission that we would do. And I have highlighted in particular 2 things, 2 objectives from the project. And one of the first ones is obviously that we are going to both test and implement, replicate and upscale very specific solutions in the urban nodes involved, so both in the Living Labs and the replicator cities. And this is where it gets interesting, because here it is, we have said that we will be looking at hubs, we will be looking at mobility hubs, we'll be looking at last mile hubs. We would try to be looking at, let's say, hubs where you can have a combination of both passenger and freight transport, which is quite interesting. Looking at, I think Emmanuel from UITP was already on this, bundles of services, accessibility and livability connected to these type of hubs. I think also Sebastian from Frankfurt was on this. We are looking at regional networks. I mean, how does a network of hubs look like, and how does that alleviate, let's say, bottleneck tendencies on different levels in transport networks, going from district level to local to regional to national to international. So this is at the core of our thinking. So at the moment, we are now doing a co-creation processes in the living labs, and we are looking at to implement the first solutions already later this year. So that's the sort of the status on that. But that will be very tremendously interesting to hear any good ideas or anything that would help us bring this forward from the audience today as part of the panel discussion. And then the second point that I wanted to highlight is obviously that we're planning to establish this platform for coordination and collaboration on TNT corridor level. And again, we see that there is a specific need for this. It was, for example, highlighted in the Vital Nodes project, that there is a sort of a need for this platform, because previously, usually what happens is that, let's say the EU has talked, let's say, from our point of view as a city, perhaps too much with the national levels and forgetting the cities. I think that's now changing. I think the revision now is very clear on this. So I think this is a very good moment for us and the plans that we have, given the revision of the TNT and some of the stuff that also Ivo mentioned in the very beginning. I think we just move on quickly to the next slide, please. So this is just a figure to sort of highlight where that we have ambitions on the TNT level in this project. Activities will predominantly happen in the urban nodes. So, and they're all situated on the ScanMed corridor. But then we have a plan to do this platform for collaboration, and then that's the ScanMed Observatory. But we also have a, let's say, broader take that potentially can involve the entire TNT network. And obviously, if the ScanMed Observatory, this initiative that we're now planning, if it's successful, we obviously hope and try to work towards it being possibly implemented elsewhere and on other corridors as well. So this is something that we would very much like to see. I think we can just move onwards. So I'm not going to go into too many details in terms of the sort of solutions that we are planning to implement on the urban node level. But as I mentioned already, you know, the hubs, seamless solutions, door-to-door solutions, intermodality is very on the top of the agenda, and also looking at the combination of, or seeing freight and passenger and transport in combination is at the core of what we're trying to do. But I would just like to mention this whole, the TNT corridor approach that we have in this project. And obviously it is because we see that we genuinely wanted to see how we can solve solutions rather than just transfer them from one domain or level to another. We wanted to promote efficient multi-governance mechanisms because we see that this is sometimes something that we as a city lack. And we wanted to see if we can build on existing sort of institutional cooperations on urban nodes level. For example, in the region that these three living labs are, there is a sort of a Northern Europe mega region and the political string network. So we wanted to see how can we build on this. And for obvious reasons, also very important, we're going to have a work stream that will try to evaluate the implemented solutions on urban nodes level to take the, let's say, broader level, the higher level look and see if How does this pan out for accessibility and network performance on TNT corridor level? So this is all in the making and something that we're planning to do in the coming years. So we can just move forward, perhaps to the next slide, please. So as you saw, the urban nodes who are part of this project are all on the ScanMed corridor, and there was a thought to this, and it's precisely because we saw that then this kind of corridor level collaboration becomes, let's say, easier, if we can put it like this. And as a result, we are now in the process of establishing a ScanMed observatory. It will be launched later this year. But the whole point of this is to have this system level perspective, have a place where cities, local and regional authorities and other stakeholders who work with local authorities and regional authorities can work together and also discuss issues, upcoming legislations, particular pressure points with the Commission. This is what we hope that this observatory can be, and really try to foster a sort of an ecosystem for governance coordination and knowledge sharing, and potentially also data sharing and common, joint follow-up projects and system components. So we really hope that this will become a useful platform, primarily now for the ScanMed corridor, but as I mentioned, if this is successful, we want this to be copied. So we want others to come and steal this if it works. And as mentioned, I think Ivo mentioned in the very beginning that there is now in the revised TMT, there is this plan for sort of corridor coordinators working groups for urban nodes. We are planning and we hope to collaborate very closely with Pat Cox, who is the ScanMed corridor coordinator, and we hope that we are also equally part of his plan. So we'll see how this fits with what is now in the TNT revision, but obviously on an overall level, I think we're all pulling in the same direction. That's, I think, very fair to say. And I think I'm going in for landing. This was a very breezy, quick introduction. Yes, this is interesting. I'm not actually sure it says 76. I'm just trying. This was actually a slide that I threw in to just show you how this is even going to be more interesting and more relevant in the years to come. We are now on the ScanMed corridor. We have had 19 nodes, urban nodes, or have still, and it's one of the largest corridors in Europe, and it stands for over 20% of the total GDP produced in EU. I think we're now moving to 76 urban nodes, and please correct me because I did a count of this one late evening and I'm not sure if it's true, and there might be still some changes because it's not adopted. So there might be some small changes to the final number of urban nodes on the ScanMed, but I think it's fair to say that it will be much larger than previously. So you can see the old corridor map on the left, and the new one, the planned ScanMed new one on the right. And I think do I have one more slide? Yes. So I just mentioned this very quickly. I'm trying to be ready in a minute, so we have time for a discussion. But so I mentioned this observatory will be placed now later this year. We're planning a launch in October at the European Week of Regions and Cities. And I really urge you to come with suggestions on what we should be focusing on. This platform is only useful if the actors involved, local and regional authorities, the Commission services, the Commission, DG Move, everyone involved, the corridor coordinators, thinks that this is a useful platform. So we would very much welcome suggestions on what this observatory should be looking at and working on in the coming years. And I can mention obviously that this is a specific work stream in the project, obviously, that is led by POLIS. So any kind of feedback, please get in touch with me, or you can also get in touch with Ivo, who can send this to the right person in POLIS.
Also,
I'll stop there.
Thank you. Also, no pressure there for us. Thank you. Thank you, Tiina. I would like to ask the panelists to all share their screens now. We have Lucian in the audience who, wisdom of the crowd's wise, says that it's plausible that that's the number of urban nodes on your corridor, Tiina. So I would like to return. There's one question for Sebastian also about how governance in Germany in general works. So with the Länder, then the federal level. So who signs what decision, Sebastian? in 30 seconds. Complex question, but
yeah, it's super complex, and the answer would be super complex. But in the end, if you look at the traditional TET approach with the projects of common interest in the CEF, this is implemented via the Bundesverkehrswegeplan. So every 5 years, you're doing a process on federal level where you set those very important infrastructure projects, and this is the kind of central negotiation round where then Länder and local level is also part of. Yeah, but you can imagine that that's very complicated in practice, and also the timeframes do not necessarily fit what's happening on European level. So that's why you need this kind of flanking additional governance structures on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think that's might be similar to other countries as well. Okay, I would like to go to the revision, and we'll come back with I think we'll touch upon tourism also in that respect through the ECF statement, and the question that is for was addressed to Emmanuel. What is the actual key connector between TEN-T and urban mobility? I would keep that as the final question for all, because it's a good point to end the meeting with. But returning to the revision, Aleksander, can you brought some slides also on what the ECF's position is about that? Can you share that, please?
Yes.
Very brief. We're running.
I will try to be very brief. Yeah. You have already said, Ivo, that most of the panelists already confirmed that the revision increases the number and the role of urban nodes, which is a positive development. It's important to recognize the role of the urban nodes. We also like that for the first time, the TEN-T policy includes a definition of active modes. So there is a recognition that they have to play some role, at least as the first or last mile of the long distance trips. The urban nodes, there is an obligation to have sustainable urban mobility plans for the urban nodes, and also obligation to collect some data, including modal speed, which we also consider very important, because for now we don't even have this data on EU level in a comparable comparable basis. Going to the specific cycling provision, there is ensuring continuity and accessibility of cycle paths was included as additional priority for rail and road projects. And this is something that sort of reflects this do no significant harm principle that Ivo mentioned. There is a but I will come to this but in a moment. And also, when there is a talk about road safety, there is the revision stresses that this road safety also needs to take into account the needs of vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians or cyclists. It's not all pros. What we saw in the test, we also see some missed opportunities or even threats in some cases. We regret that there was no integration of Eurovelo as an additional mode of transport in the section on infrastructure. This provision of do no significant harm is not really implying systematic exploitation of opportunities for new cycling connections. So this is something that still remains in the recital to the regulation, but is not reflected in the guidelines themselves. The connections between active modes and long distance transport were limited basically to urban nodes. But the urban nodes, the big cities are important, but they do represent around 30% of the European population. There is a lot of medium-sized towns which are perfect for riding a bicycle because the distances are short, and on longer distances they can be perfectly combined with trains. And finally, there is something we consider a threat, a new requirement to upgrade all the 20 roads in the comprehensive network basically to almost a motorway standard, which we're afraid that it will increase the barrier effect of the 20 roads in rural areas and especially in more remote areas. And this new requirement is stronger than the positive developments I've shown before. So it's stronger than continuity of cycle paths or safety of vulnerable road users. One that promise, this is the only place where I quote the exact legal text, but this is the specific provision for do no significant harm in terms of cycling infrastructure. It's duplicated for railway and road infrastructure in Articles 18 and 30. It says that when building or upgrading railway or road infrastructure, you need to ensure the continuity and accessibility of pedestrian and cycling paths in order to promote the active mode of transport. It sounds very nice, and it's already a step forward, because in the past we've had cases when motorway construction, for example, uprooted pre-existing cycle tracks. But we would like it to be more clear that it applies not only to tracks that were built before, but also to plans, to potential connections, to needs to connect places on both sides of the motorway or railroad. This will help in places when there is already developed cycle network, but most of the TEN-T investments are now happening in countries where it's not the case, where you build the cycling network at the same time or maybe even later than the long distance infrastructure.
Can you jump straight to the last
Okay,
point?
So I will not give you the examples. We have some proposals how to improve the Commission's proposals. We prepared a package of amendments, and it starts again from coming back to also thinking about tourism aspect of TEN-T and providing sustainable alternatives. We don't think that this is very smart or sustainable, that as for now the TEN-T policy supports investments in, for example, cruise ship terminals or airports, but doesn't support, for example, a cross-border cycle trail that is used by 30 times more people. We need to address the barrier effect of TEN-T. If you create a barrier, you should be also responsible for making it permeable for local traffic. We think that TEN-T projects should be an opportunity to create new cycling connections. And there is still a room to flesh out a bit the section on urban nodes, which is a sort of a revolution, but still it's much less technical than the other sections of the same chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Aleksander. I think we, from the side of POLIS, we have also noticed this the application area of the infrastructure directives that will expand into the urban nodes, of course. So that's something we look into in detail and with some concern as well, which also directly relates to the more field of activity, the idea of how to design locations at the interface between the long distance and the local traffic. Emmanuel, you also had some short comments on the 10T revision.
Yes.
Please keep it limited in
I'll keep
time.
it very
Thank you.
short because
Okay,
everything I think has been said already. I think
Okay.
from the ITP point of view, just maybe linking those TNT and also the Sump approach, which should probably be made more coherent. Maybe we could also consider some criteria for fundings that could privilege the sort of multimodal, clean, coherent approach, relying on the Sump. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one of the points of coherence or problems with coherence we found, and maybe Sebastian will also go into that direction with his comments, is the fact that the urban node definition, the list of urban nodes, which are basically cities, and then the Sump area, the functional urban area, don't really not always match in terms of territory covered, but also authorities involved or competent to plan. So I think that's something we'll maybe I took your stole your thunder, Sebastian. I flag up your slide also, Sebastian, for what you wanted to say in that regard. I hope that's the right one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I think, the perfect connection, Ivo, because indeed that was one of the core messages I also wanted to highlight. But maybe before, we heard now a lot about this revolutions putting the urban nodes in the heart of the new TNT. This is also something that I really want to stress, because this is, I think, the point that we work together with a lot of other regions via ERIN and POLIS to get that happening. Because if you really understand the TNT, not just, you know, as some additional European cross-border projects, but really as a Green Deal aligned mobility system, then the urban nodes are of the same systemic relevance than all the other parts of the TNT. And I think the new regulation, or the proposal for the new regulation, makes that very clear with the new Chapter 7 and also the objectives in Article 4 that are linked to urban nodes. So I think this is really something where we should work together so that the policymakers will keep that intact in the end of the political process. And then the second point is indeed the role of the Sump approach, because I'm convinced that this is the kind of glue you need to bring together the urban mobility policies and the traditional long-distance TNT infrastructures. And I think the Commission made a quite clever proposal with having this Annex 5 outlining minimum criteria for a Sump, and also making sure in the Sump definition of the TNT regulation that this is definitely not something just for the city, but it's about the functional urban area. And as you rightly outlined, Ivo, the question is now how you make that fly on the ground. So this is the very big question that we have, because if you read that definition, it sounds a bit like, okay, then the kind of city is doing the planning for the functional urban area. But this is clearly a problem when you have a polycentric regions with several urban nodes. And this is the approach I liked to outline for FrankfurtRheinMein, and I think it could be a role model for all the polycentric regions, that you really need an active role for these regional authorities doing a real planning for the whole functional urban area. And this is something I'd say the proposal is at the moment a bit blind for. I wouldn't blame the Commission for that, because it's difficult to, do that legally. But this is something that we really have to keep in mind also when it comes to this recommendations for the Sump support framework, the new Sump revision, and let's say the soft support measures and offers on European level. And then a last sentence maybe to the balance between obligations and benefits for urban nodes, Article 40 and 41. You mentioned that the obligations are quite clear, and there are some nice benefits for funding in Article 41. And this maybe fits what Aleksander said. I'm not so sure at the moment that you really can benefit from the benefits, because in the end, it's about the CEF, and at least for highly developed regions, there's a lot less money in the CEF, and you still have the federal ministry as a kind of gatekeeper. So, I mean, for the big transport infrastructures like our tunnel or something like that, that won't be a problem. But for these new interesting priorities like shift to active mobility, modal shift, that's in this Article 41 now, it's hard to imagine that that size project from a city will kind of go to Berlin and ask for permission and then go in the CEF competition. So I appreciate that it's in, but I can't see yet, you know, how this practically brings added value to the ground.
Okay, thank you. Tiina, we didn't ask you to bring slides about the revision, because we decided for you that it might be a bit difficult as a European project to recommend on policies. But I can ask you, how will you work with the revision in Move 21? Do you test some of the concepts that are in the revision, or is it part of the dialogue in the project?
Well, that's a good question. I think we will. Well, some of the concepts are definitely part of the project, so this will be tested, right? And then it's a matter of having that good dialogue on EU level, and that's already started now. And then obviously all of the different urban nodes have their own ongoing processes by which they, let's say, put forward their suggestions and opinions on the revision, and that's also an ongoing process. But then we try not to at this stage focus too much on that. But I think that will also be relevant to see what are the sort of commonalities, or let's say common pressure points and challenges that the urban nodes foresee. But that's a bit too early to say right now. But that would be an interesting working paper in itself from our side.
Yeah. I think also in line with Lucian's comment in the chat, I think that might be also something for the ScanMet Observatory to say, okay, what are now the governance? What is the role between the ambassador, so the entity, the local government that is mentioned in the list of urban nodes, and then the actual urban nodal ecosystem that is part of the local governance that implements the measures on public transport, on cycling, makes the plan in a coherent way. So that could be and are there models? Do these models shift within a country or between countries? So these kind of questions could be really interesting to solve and maybe apply to a specific topic like freight or public transport or cycling. I could be interesting. Okay, just
I totally I totally agree, Ivo, and I think this is something that we will be. It's precisely these type of discussions that we will be having this year. And I mean, I would just foresee that there's so many, let's say, interesting but also difficult questions, for example, related to regional governance. I think this is at least something that we already see for some of the urban nodes involved in the 21 project, is that this is extremely complicated, and also there is not always good working relationships, and there's a lot of issues here. But I mean, this is complicated territory, and I don't think this is done in a few meetings to sort of figure this out. But I think this is where I hope Move 21 will play a really let's say hopefully a constructive role, and also the ScanMed Observatory. This is at least the aim from my side.
Okay, thank you. Returning to the questions, there was this question in the chat about tourism. Aleksander, you have said something about Eurovelo, not only a tourism issue, of course, but can you expand a bit on the importance of tourism? You're muted still. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, this is one of our concerns to this revision, that it sort of ignores the touristic role of TEN-T. It's focused on long distance, more utilitarian transport, but a lot of trips done on the TEN-T are actually touristic. And tourism, going back to the decarbonization issue, 70% of tourism emission are related to transport, to people going to their holiday place, taking cruise ships, and so on and so on. And there is no EU-level policy that would address that. So the tourism document sort of shifted to transport, and the EU transport policy didn't make any progress in this aspect. In this revision. I think that specific question that was asked in the chat was more addressed to the cities. How do they plan to take tourism into account in their sustainable urban mobility plans? Because this is also, but cities are one side of this, and the other one is the trans-European aspect.
So maybe, yeah, I can bring the question to the cities, to Sebastian and to Tiina. I don't see Frankfurt as the tourism hotspot. I'm sorry, Sebastian. Maybe you can convince me now.
It lies very close to the Eurovelo 15, the Rhine cycle route. So
I give you. I let Sebastian change my mind on that point now.
You're kindly invited to Frankfurt. You know, it's a very beautiful city.
Okay.
Don't judge from the beton and skyscraper.
No. Okay. Indeed.
A lot to offer.
Yeah.
But no, joking aside, I really think, or at least that's the approach on regional level, that try not to artificially divide between different forms of transport. So when we plan, we need to bring together logistics, personal transport, and not, because planners always tend to, then you have your responsibility, and then you do your specific sectorial plan. And the idea really is to bring that together on the regional level. But that said, there is no specific approach for tourism, then at least on the regional level. We have a lot of touristic agency for the different cities, and they are also kind of then linked to the consultation processes. But under the bar, it's rather the idea not to dwell too much into the different sectors and forms of transport, but really bring it together and develop a common approach.
Okay. Tiina, I assume for ScanMet that is an issue, or?
Sorry?
I assume that tourism is an issue for some of the locations on the corridor.
Well, yes, I'm a bit hesitant to speak on behalf of the whole ScanMet corridor and the urban nodes, but for Oslo, I mean, I think I can only echo what Sebastian already said. But we are also looking at how we can make, let's say, some additional tweaks. So I can only say for the city of Oslo, we are currently writing a tourism strategy, obviously, where actually what Aleksander you just brought in is actually going to be part of it. Hopefully, at least we've been lobbying very hard for that. So that's the plan, but it's still in the making. So this is still an ongoing process. So I'm not going to say too much about that.
Yep. Okay, good. Yeah, Emmanuel, you of course.
Yes. On this topic of tourism, I think from government and transport authority and transport operators' point of view, I think we're still trying to understand what the new normal is going to be. And during the COVID period, and we can hear this also now for instance, in the Belgian media, that for 2022, it is expected that Belgian people will stick to the 2021 habits of traveling around Belgium, probably maybe closer types of distance. So what will be the new normal in terms of in terms of tourism is quite a big question. What balance, what will be the balance between, let's say, short national, regional trips versus more long distance type of trips? If we look at long distance trips, are we going still to rely on the quick, fast, polluting plane, or are we going to use trains? So this could have also some impact on whether we travel by train and bike, etc., etc. So I think there are a couple of options that we should keep open. We should probably carry on monitor this. But to support what Sebastian and Tiina and also Aleksander said, and you hinted at this, it's probably very important still always to consider multimodality as a key element for TNTs, because multimodal variety of usage, all this goes together. And if we want to make sure that in the future we meet different needs, which are maybe not still always clear today or not fully developed today in a sustainable way, we need to make sure all modes have their place, room, possibility, are integrated. So yeah, that's it. And this applies to tourism. This could also apply to freight, for instance, urban freight. Thanks.
Of course, prediction of the future is very difficult, but from the trends that we've seen during the pandemic, cyclotourism is on the rise. So we see more and more tourism in 2020. We have seen it in 2021. So maybe it will not be, maybe it will be local cycle trips, but maybe going between, for example, Brussels and Paris, or between Frankfurt and Rotterdam. But this at the time when all the tourism was losing visitors, the cyclotourism was on the rise.
Okay, good. Thank you. We have reached the end of the time that has been allocated. We don't have time for closing remarks, but when I think when I try to wrap this up, we heard about multimodal. We have heard that we have to think in an integrated system of different modes that cooperate. Also try to develop infrastructures that don't do harm to specific modes. So I think that's a good lesson also. We have to think multi-purpose. We talked about tourism, freight, passengers, etc. We talked about multi-level governance also to be looked at. And then also this complex interaction between services, infrastructure, and the plan that governs such the integration or the interaction between these both components is important. I think there's one element I would like to highlight is that this is one of the EU policies that is actually looking quite far ahead and looking is there for the long run, and also in many cases policies that are developed are implemented in a financial framework period that follows the period in which the policies are developed. So I assume that might also be the case for the new urban nodes approach, where where we plant the seed of what urban nodes can be. We have planted the seeds for urban nodes in the previous revision. We are now coming to a full understanding and full grasp of what urban nodes can mean to the network. And I think we hope the financial and governance systems will be in place in a next financial framework period. Then I think that's a bit could be the hopeful scenario for what we are trying to do. Prepared also by projects like Move 21, to which More now happily hands over the baton, to put it in athletics terms. So thank you all for being here, for the participants, for the speakers, and we also agree with Lucian, who says, and we have an important legacy that we are now we have to dutifully bring forward through our networks here present also. Okay, I say goodbye, and you'll be contacted by Daniel with the meeting results and presentations and recording also. Thank you, and we'll meet soon, hopefully in real life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.